this evening? No? Okay, let's move on to the city manager's report. Sabrina?
Just really briefly, our polls are open downstairs for anybody watching at home for 6 more minutes. So if anybody wants to run on down, we are hosting a polling place down at City Hall. That's it.
Okay, thank you.
Move the consent calendar.
Could I
There are
pull
items?
item 5.8? This is the new image landscape contract.
Okay,
And I'd like to pull 5.9.
okay,
I'll second the rest.
okay. Anyone opposed to moving the rest of it? No? Okay. Item 5.8, Jennifer.
Great. As you know, I'm a member of the Emeryville Community Organic Garden, and there are a crew of folks there who work very hard working with the city and with our landscape contractor to maintain, there's a little portion of our linear park that runs right behind the organic garden there. And so when we have work days, we often spend hours of our time working on that patch, but there's also certain portions that New Image Landscape takes care of. And so when our contract came this time, I noticed how detailed it was. It's very detailed about, techniques for mulching this and the way to prune that and don't take away all the leaves. And I really want to applaud the city for addressing some critical, I think, and smart management techniques for landscape. But I don't know a lot about it. I'm not a landscape designer or maintenance person myself. And so I asked some folks who are involved in our garden to look at the contract and give some feedback. And I shared that with staff ahead of time. And I just would like staff to comment and then maybe also hear from some folks who maybe it's not so much about the contract that needs to be changed, but just about our process and the accountability and the checking in and the interface between our city staff and our contractor.
Okay. Maurice, do you want to?
Sure. If I could just respond that, we've been working with New Image Landscaping for a number of years now, and at the end of 2012, fiscal year 11-12, we decided it would be a good idea to go out for RFP, and we needed to change those specifications and really tighten them up. And we worked with the Bay Friendly Coalition to get a template specification, and then we refined really what the routine work would be to better define the monthly work that they're going to do. Actually, it's most of the sites are visited on once a week, but so we better define that, and we better define what the extra work was, because the previous contract, it wasn't clear as to whether or not when the plants died, whether or not it was included to replace the plants. So we could have been arguing for days on as to what was really included. So we cleaned it up and we put it out to bid. And at that time, we received 5 proposals, and New Image was the lowest responsible but qualified bidder of the bunch. The next bidder up was about $20,000 more. So we awarded the contract, so the conditions have changed, the requirements have changed, and so this was the first year of that contract, and we've noticed a difference in the work. They're visiting all the sites more regularly. We see that there's good weeding going on, generally speaking. You can always find some weeds that are still left, but in general, the city looks really good. And I will say that there's a new manager on board with that company, and he's very responsive. But I will say that we've had a change in personnel in our Public Works Department. Typically, over the years, we've been working with ECOG to make sure that we coordinate what's done around the community garden. And there was a side agreement between the Public Works crew and ECOG as to who's doing what around the community garden. With the leaving of our staff people, plus change in personnel at New Images, there's been a lack of communication with ECOG. So we're on top of it right now. We've got a meeting set up so that we can make sure their concerns are heard, and to kind of define what it is that they want to do around the community garden. So with that.
Would anyone from the public like to comment on this item? Yeah. Thanks, Maurice.
Jean Robertson, thank you for the opportunity to speak. I think it's great that you have adopted the Bay Friendly standards, that there are standards and you can adopt them and put that into the contract. So that's wonderful. I would be so thrilled to see those those parameters actually employed by New Image. As far as I can tell, they've they do a good job at cutting the grass. I mean, these standards say that they should be monitoring the irrigation monthly, weekly, and there's problems on the Greenway that I know about personally, and I haven't inspected every one of these sites that is in this contract. But I know some of the sites, and we have problems going back over a year. In fact, the last time there was a series of repairs was after we poked and prodded, and finally at the end of summer, after the growing season was over, finally some irrigation things got fixed, and that was in 2012. We're in spring 2014, and the irrigation is just dumping water when it comes on, if it comes on. I think they just finally turned it on, and there's giant pools, and the pathways are eroded because the irrigation is broken and just shooting here and there. So basically, our biggest problem is they don't do much hand weeding. They don't have much savvy with pruning, so boxes and balls. Sometimes they prune things well, but a lot of times they don't. And they don't keep up with weeding. And so under their watch, what started out as a brand new landscape has become seriously degraded with noxious weeds that it's just like get worse every year. And we're out there a lot. I personally pay my own landscape guys to work back there because it's hard to keep up. And the Emeryville garden, we volunteer all kinds of time. But the city guys, the city contractors are not doing enough hand weeding, and under their watch it just gets worse and worse. So some areas are good, and some areas they take care of, and some areas look okay. In other areas, they just kind of mow and blow, and they get more degraded. So one other thing I want to point out is that I think it's a worthy dialogue to ask the question, how do we take care of public spaces that get high traffic, and how do we take care of public spaces that get super high traffic? It's a fair question. It's not the landscaper's fault that 500 people are pooping and peeing their dogs on the Greenway every day. Or every week. So it's a fair question. And I would love for us to problem solve with the city and New Image to up their standard, because they've been doing a slipshod job, at least as far as irrigation is concerned. That's just one item, and that's been egregious. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else on this item?
Sam Fouchi, and I'm the president of Emeryville Community Organic Gardens, the nonprofit that runs the Doyle Street Garden and Big Daddy's Garden, and a new garden that's coming very soon to 48th Street. I just want to say a couple words about this side agreement that Maurice referred to. So actually, it dates back a little bit further than that. When the Greenway was done and completed back in 04, I believe it was, 04, 05, and we opened the new Emeryville Community Garden at that time, in the process of planning the Greenway, we had some input, several of us from the garden, in what went in there, and some changes were made from the original design because of our input. And then after the garden and the Greenway were open, we agreed informally at the time that we would be involved in helping to maintain the area around the garden. We actually took responsibility for the parking strip, which is right next to the garden on Doyle Street, even though it's not part of the garden and technically is part of the city's, part of their city area that the city is responsible for. But we agreed to just be responsible for that, and I feel have done an excellent job in keeping it looking good and being an asset to the whole area. And we also agreed to help to maintain the plantings next to the fence on both Doyle and 59th Street, right next to the garden, because it just made sense for us to do that work so that it coordinated what we were doing inside the garden. So I say that by way of to establish a context for what eventually happened, which was in 2010, we actually sat down with Mike Mahoney, the supervisor of public works at that time, and the field supervisor, and two people from New Image, and myself, we sat down and we went over all the things for the greenway part of it, which is on the west side of the garden, that we would like to see better taken care of. And so we came up with a side agreement, as Maurice called it, and it was quite detailed. And there have been times in the past 4 years where some, or maybe even most of the things on it were addressed, and then there's been a lot of times, as Jean referred to, that where things have just fallen by the wayside. And we understand that there are a lot of reasons for that, and we just want to see it kind of, we'd like to see it fixed. So I'm very encouraged with the willingness of the new field supervisor for the Public Works, Rich Cunningham, and the new regional supervisor for New Image, being very anxious to sit down with us and see if we can hash out all the issues so that it all works for all of us. And so the burden doesn't fall on, I just feel like the burden has fell unduly on the garden members who've been willing to work. We've put in a lot of time and energy, but we
Thanks,
just can't
Sam.
keep up. We can't do it all ourselves, and so I'm looking forward to working that out.
Okay, thank you, Sam. And Maurice, have these concerns already been communicated to the landscapers, or?
Oh, yes, and so we're trying to set up the meeting right now, so, and then so that we can maybe redo this side agreement so we know who's doing
Redo it.
what.
Okay.
Yeah, you bet.
Okay, all right, thank you. Go ahead.
I would like the mayor to be a little more diligent on like making people adhere to the timeline.
I think that's a great idea.
In a fair way and equitable. In other words, if you do it to some people, you got to do it to everybody. Thank you.
Move approval of the resolution.
Second.
Anyone opposed? Okay,
I just would like to make sure that the conversations with New Image aren't just about the area right around ECOG, but that all the standards that we expect of them are
You bet.
uniformly.
We're going to go over all the obligations of the specifications with them, remind them of all their requirements,
Thank you.
and then we'll monitor it.
okay,
Thanks so
Maurice.
much, and thanks for your comments this evening.
Okay, Kurt,
Okay, 5.9.
5.9.
Hey, Maurice, when we